Okay, so good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. I know we have folks joining us from all over the world, and I want to be the first to welcome you to our third and final day of the COVID-19 Pandemic Conference webinar, being sponsored by Routledge Publishers, the International Sociological Association, and Nazarbayev University. My name is Michael Ryan, and I will be your ringleader of events for today, as we hear from some of the world's leading experts on the COVID-19 pandemic and explore topics ranging from parenthood to policing to citizenship to climate change, and really a little bit of everything in between. In my opening remarks for today, I'm going to talk just briefly about what pandemic inequalities mean and the possibilities and potentials of a post-pandemic world. Now, that's obviously a lot to cover in less than 15 minutes, but I do want to start the day by at least briefly touching on some of these issues and then look forward to our wonderful lineup of presenters to help unpack some of them. We're all in this together. That hopeful mantra, widely expressed by the media, political leaders, and scientific experts in the early stages of the pandemic, was meant to generate a sense of security, suggesting that through collaborative efforts, the world would quickly overcome this historic global disaster. The reality is turning out quite differently. The COVID-19 pandemic, like other global catastrophes, reveals the many deep-rooted and far-reaching inequalities throughout the world, affecting vulnerability, treating and containing the virus among individuals, communities, and nations. While some of these inequalities are related to biological factors such as age, sex, and prior medical conditions, the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 are based in the seldom acknowledged and often suppressed inequities rooted in structural differences such as national economic development, minority group status, class divisions, working conditions, citizenship status, geography, political ideologies, and widespread discrimination. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare and exacerbated the underlying weaknesses of every society it's touched: vast economic inequalities, overdependence on global production and trading chains, disastrously weak medical systems, national inequalities regarding testing capacity. The list really goes on and on. Kinaga Yamada Taylor has pointedly stated that the COVID-19 pandemic has, quote, pulled what is hidden and buried on the bottom to the surface so that it can't be ignored. It is a radicalizing factor because conditions that have been so dire, now combined with revolts in the street, might lead one to believe that not only is the society unraveling, but it might cause you to question what foundations it was built upon in the first place, end quote. Indeed, the unequal social impact of a virus that is blind to social difference can tell us much about the ways in which our societies are constructed. Diseases do not distinguish their hosts by race, class, gender, or sexuality, but pandemics unearth just how much human beings do. A lot of what we've heard over the last 2 days, and no doubt a lot of what we're going to hear today, is quite a bit of doom and gloom. The world is unequal, and now even more unequal in this way, that way, and the other way. And to be honest, that sits pretty well with me because I tend to be a gloom and doom kind of guy, or as I like to defend myself, a realist. And this seems a particularly troubling day to talk about any sense of optimism, which I promise I am getting to. But to talk about that today is perhaps extra troubling, as just yesterday, the World Health Organization announced that last week there were more than 5.2 million confirmed new cases reported, the highest weekly increase since the pandemic began. And I want to repeat that, the highest weekly increase since the pandemic began. Vaccine complacency, at least in the still relatively few privileged rich countries where vaccines are now widely available to the majority of the population, combined with news of improving economies, at least in the places the global media tends to focus on, i.e. Western privileged nations, and a general fatigue with hearing, thinking, and dealing with COVID-19 have all combined to lull many of us into thinking that this is over, or that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And there is a light, but for now it's a speck. And whether or not we as a global community head toward or away from that light has yet to be determined. That said, and as much as it pains me to confess it, especially on record, I do also see shards and shimmers of hope in a lot of the content of this conference. And I think a lot of that has to do with my own personal conception of social justice. You see, for me, the first step in making the world a better, more just, more fair, more equitable place is understanding why it isn't. If you want to fix a problem, then you have to know what that problem is. And the scholarship from this conference has done just that. It has identified key problems that we have seen emerge, intensify, and transform over the course of the pandemic. And more than just identify, the scholarship has analyzed. One of the taglines for this conference, as well as the 2 volumes on which it is based, is that the breadth and depth of the scholarship to be presented is matched only by the intellectual and global scope of the presenters themselves. That's a grand statement, but it's one that I absolutely believe to be true. What is perhaps missing from that tagline, however, is that there's also a breadth and depth of opportunities being presented in this work. Many presenters address these more explicitly by providing recommendations or lessons learned, but all of them have an important inherent implication that by merely producing, and via the volumes in this conference, sharing knowledge, they are all initiating that important first step of awareness that is the foundation for any social justice action. Really, of any action prerequisite of moving us toward the light. Acclaimed author Noah Yuval Harari has pseudo-optimistically mused on the future by noting that we do still have choices, and that, quote, if we choose global solidarity, it will be a victory not only against the coronavirus, but against all future epidemics and crises that might assail humankind in the 21st century, end quote. The current situation is indeed presenting an us versus them scenario, but it's also presenting humanity, and by humanity here, I mean a combination of both us and them, with an opportunity to do something. One option is to sit back and to continue to let them take advantage of a global pandemic to increase their profits, powers, and discriminatory ideologies. Another is to encourage, nay, demand that our fellow citizens, political leaders, and global institutions enforce a more honest version of we. The first choice leads to a world of even greater othering and inequality. The second leads us to a world where global humanity comes together as a larger community and begins to measure its successes by the well-being of the worst off among us. So far, we've largely made the wrong choice, but especially now that we're in the age of vaccination, it's particularly important that we begin to make the right one. In our sessions today, we'll look deeper into many of the issues I've just raised. Our first session, for example, will look at changing social understandings in response to crisis and include presentations critically analyzing the now globally popular bubble metaphor, first made popular in New Zealand. We'll also enjoy sessions on innovation diffusion, social capital, and mass mobilization, and a talk on new sources of parenting stress and the changing meanings of time with and for children. Our second session of the day will take a closer look at a range of social injustices, including issues of violence and race, pandemic policing, and reproductive injustice. For our third session today, we'll turn our attention to changing understandings of the social order and learn from presentations on citizenship, climate change and systemic racism, and the highly innovative concept of toxic Wild West syndrome. We'll wrap up our day today with a much anticipated keynote address from Professor Sari Hanafi, current president of the International Sociological Association, who will provide key insights into what a post-COVID-19 sociology might look like. So without further ado, let me end by once again thanking all of you for tuning in with us today. I know it's early morning for many of you, lunchtime for others, and well into the evening hours for our friends further east. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy mornings, afternoons, and evenings and joining us. I truly believe that the scholarship lined up for today is something unparalleled, at least from what I've seen, and I very much hope that you will agree. So with that brief introduction, I now want to wait just 2 or 3 minutes to get the next session set up, and then we'll get started with our session on changing social understandings in response to crisis. Thank you.